it's Bailey. I'm going to be discussing the Jane Austen's Persuasion prompt. This prompt says to read the passage from Jane Austen's Persuasion carefully, paying careful attention to organization, the selection of detail, to compose a well-written essay in which you analyze the development of Sir Walter Elliot's character. So the first thing I discuss in my essay is the literary element of tone. Automatically, the reader sees the tone as Walter Elliot is described by the narrator as a man who, for his own amusement, never took up any book but the Baryontage. I describe this book as being a book of details of the British families of nobility, meaning that he may have wished or was a man of nobility himself. This is seen automatically. It's in the very first paragraph of the passage. This quote is also an example of diction by Austen, because she chose to make Walter sound this way just by using the word never. That word implies that he literally never picked up any other book other than this one, meaning that he was only interested in sounding noble and rich, making him sound very cocky and full of himself. This is again further seen later on in the passage, where the narrator further describes him as being able to read his own history with an interest that never failed. This gives the further feeling to the reader that Walter is full of himself. It is also not only another example of diction, but it's also an example of euphemism, since it implies his only interest seems to be himself and his family, but not in a direct way. Then I discuss how the narrator continues through the passage and describes Sir Walter Elliot's wife, Lady Elliot, as she's called. This is a shift in tone that the reader will notice. Lady Elliot is described as an excellent woman and sensible by the narrator, which is an example of tone and diction, because the reader perceives Lady Elliot as better than her husband through her short description, and continues to make the reader feel this way through the use of another description as her humoring or softening or concealing her husband's failings. I describe how the use of softer sounding words to the reader makes the reader feel as though she is also a softer person than Sir Walter Elliot is, and she may come off as a more likable character than he would. The narrator is also finally seen making Lady Walter a more relatable and lovable character by finally adding that she wasn't the very happiest being in the world herself, unlike how the reader would perceive Walter in himself. And it also makes her more likable and lovable to the reader, since Sir Walter is never given this description. I finally touch on how the organization of the passage does play a very important role of the effect of the tone of the passage. For example, if Austen had put the passage describing Lady Elliot in the beginning, the reader would feel differently about both her and Walter. That would be because she would be perceived as a more predominant and important role in the family. And the reader would then see Walter as a very unlikely match, still very cocky, almost maybe cruel man to be with her. But since it is not this way, it is the other way of, not the other way around. The reader perceives Walter as a more comedic type of character, because it's just kind of ridiculous that he's so full of himself. And yeah, then overall, the author Jane Austen used various literary elements for her organization of the passage and her closeness to detail to effectively describe the character Walter Elliot. In an interesting way, the reader sees changes in tone, the use of diction, and euphemism as the most predominant literary elements throughout the passage, but they also see the importance of Walter's wife as well. To summarize the passage as a whole, it is just a short description of a man that seems very full of himself, very full of how his family is perceived, and is only very interested in the way his family comes off as. He wants them to come off as rich and important throughout the passage. So yeah, okay, have a great day. Bye-bye.